Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk. The McLaughlin Group is brought to you by Siemens. Every day, Siemens answers are helping build the future of America. Siemens Answers.
We never thought we'd be farming wind out here.
It's not just building jobs here, it's helping our community.
Siemens' location here has just received a major order of wind turbines.
It puts a huge smile on my face because I'm like, this is what we do.
The fact that Iowa is leading the way in wind energy, I'm so proud. Like, it's just amazing.
Issue 1, Putin in our backyard.
It's not a new Cold War. What it is a very specific issue related to Russia's unwillingness to recognize that Ukraine can chart its own path.
President Obama may want to consult another president, Vladimir Putin, about whether or not we are in a new Cold War. Now that Mr. Putin has not only invaded our U.S. sphere of influence, but capitalized on the hemisphere long term. And get this, last month, July, just passed, Mr. Putin visited Cuba and met with the Castro brothers, Raul and Fidel, legendary Marxist revolutionaries who have run Cuba since 1958, almost 6 decades. Ties between Russia and Cuba hit a low point after the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the last Cold War. But Russia has since hit the reset button hard on relations with Havana. Mr. Putin's mission was to cement growing cooperation and camaraderie between Russia and Cuba. In February, Russia's defense minister began talks with Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua about establishing, just 90 miles from Florida and bordering the Panama Canal, get this, Russian military bases. Cuba ran up a debt to Russia dating back to the Soviet era of $35 billion. On his July trip, President Putin waived $32 billion in debt. Also, new commercial agreements on energy and trade were inked by Vlad and Raul. Our remaining $3 billion will be used for education in Cuba. Mr. Putin also wants to invest in the creation of a grand transportation hub with modernization of the maritime port of Mariel, the construction of a modern airport with its cargo terminal, and petroleum projects on the island's north coast, including drilling for new oil and potentially vast volume offshore deposits. Next stop, Argentina. President Putin visited Argentinian President Cristina Fernandez and signed agreements with her on nuclear energy generation involving the massive Russian atomic corporation Rosatom.
Question, is President Obama's belief that this is not a Cold War, a new one, is that wishful thinking on his part, Pat Buchanan?
No, it's not. There is not a new Cold War, John. Putin is playing in our backyard because we are playing in his backyard. He doesn't want a Cold War. He's got a real problem in Ukraine, but let me tell you something. He and Angela Merkel are working behind the scenes for a deal whereby Russia cuts off aid to the separatists in Ukraine in return for recognition of his ownership of the Crimea Peninsula. He pays reparations, and after that, Russia comes back in from the cold. The Europeans don't want Russia out in the cold. I don't want Russia out in the cold. Putin doesn't want to stay out in the cold. I believe he does still see his future as with the West, and I think what they're doing down there is nothing more than playing games.
Eleanor?
I think these are targets of opportunity for Putin. He's in our backyard, as Pat says, because he can, and he sees the U.S. is in his backyard, and he wants to let us know how it feels. And he's also going to sign some sweetheart deals there, sweetheart for the recipients, just like he did with China. He gave China really a good break on oil and gas, and he's likely to do the same with these South American countries as well, because he likes the political credibility that comes with it. I don't think there's anything to fear about this. I think he does like to remind us that back in the Soviet era, during the 80s, they were in El Salvador, they were in Guatemala, they were in Nicaragua, and he's basically letting us know that you know, he can play there as well as we can play in his part of the world.
It only takes one side on this to start a Cold War. Truman didn't stop the first Cold War, Stalin did. If Putin thinks it's a Cold War, the U.S. will feel the chill no matter how long Obama tries to stay in ostrich mode.
If they try to put missiles back into Cuba, then we're talking about a Cold War. Otherwise, some ports and pipeline deals, that's commercialism in the 21st century.
Do you share all this happy talk?
I don't, I'm afraid. No, I think Putin quite enjoys the Cold. We have to remember he's a KGB officer who, I think, quite frankly, never left the KGB. And I think if you look at what's happening in Eastern Europe, not simply with Ukraine, but Poland, Moldova, the perception of weakness and the perception of vulnerability, and now obviously what's happening in Central and Latin America, there is a clear statement on behalf of the Russian government to try and assert its interests as they see it around the world. And I would argue, in you know, deference to Pat, that actually the things we're seeing here are a pretty concerning movement towards a new Cold War, because they really do affect the U.S. in tangible strategic ways.
He cut a very big deal in Argentina. He's going to make nuclear reactors for...
Let him build a nuclear power plant. There's no ideological content to this conflict. He is a Russian nationalist. He's not a Marxist-Leninist who wants to take over the world. As Eleanor said, he's not going to put intermediate range ballistic missiles in Cuba. If he does, I'm wrong.
What do you think, Mark?
Look, let's go back with Cuba, okay? Russia's had a relationship with Cuba and with the Castros going back decades, okay?
Which you know very well, because you knew Fidel very well.
I knew Fidel very well. I've been to that country about 8 or 9 times. I've spent a lot of time with Fidel Castro.
I attended a lunch where Fidel Castro was at hand, and it was in your place in New York.
That's right. He is a remarkable man. Castro is not our favorite guy, but he's a unbelievably charismatic man. I don't think I've ever seen somebody with greater appeal to an audience as to see him talking to his own people. It's just extraordinary. His brother's a different kind of a person. His brother's just an operating man, but Castro is a visionary, at least in Cuban terms, and his visions go way beyond Cuba. So I don't think this is anything of a surprise.
These guys are 90 years old.
Yeah, well,
what are we talking about?
Maybe
Wait a minute. Propping these guys up and moving them around in carts or something?
Maybe Putin is there.
He's still there, and he intends to do something for the longer term and the interests of Cuba, and his brother is a lot younger.
But do you see them as a threat to the United States that they were at one time?
No, of course not. I didn't say that. I didn't even come close to saying that.
Maybe Putin is there taking charisma lessons from Fidel.
Well, I think
let Tom in.
The issue we have in Europe, that's what it comes down to. Whether it's about, I think you're right in that sense that this is nationalism rather than Marxism. But the problem is, what does it say about the current position with the administration at the moment? The president today is saying, well, the sanctions, they're working slowly. Clearly they're not. Clearly Putin is saying, come on.
If Putin wanted eastern Ukraine, he could have marched in and taken it. He doesn't want it. But I think he would like to have it. He would like to win a victory there, but he doesn't want to annex this part of it.
I think he's annexing it under the surface. That's what he's doing. He's playing the long game with us.
In a way, if he walked in and taken it, this problem would be over.
He's laying the groundwork, as he pointed out, in Moldova. Can you speak to that anymore?
Yeah, I think what you see, I mean, you speak to politicians in Eastern Europe, they do see this as a regional, a covert invasion under the surface.
They got Transnistria broke away from Moldova. He can't even reach, he doesn't have a common border with Moldova.
But he can reach it covertly. He can reach it in the same way that he's reaching Eastern Ukraine, with the pretense that we haven't invaded, but we have.
With everything going on, if this comes down to Moldova, I'm
but Poland.
Just fine.
Well, wait a minute. Are you really ridiculing Moldova? Try their honey. Try their honey. I mean, literal honey.
But it's also about America's credibility in the world.
I buy
Moldova
honey. Exit question. Since Russia's re-annexation of Crimea, Western diplomacy with Vladimir Putin has been premised on drawing him back from the fringes, if you will. Is that working? Yes or no?
I think it's going to work, because I don't believe he wants to annex, and I think he wants the sanctions lifted, and I think ultimately he does see his future, not with China, but with the West.
Quickly.
I think actually they will work. The broader sanctions were just put in place last week. They can't tighten the vice that quickly. he's going to feel the pain.
Tom?
I think tougher sanctions could work. I really do not believe these will at the moment, because they haven't been tough enough in terms of the energy sectors, which is very difficult with the EU. But I think if we were willing to push the line, then they could work. But at the moment, I don't see it, and I think it reinforces his perception that he can do what he wishes to do.
Mark?
Look, I think there's some intangible quality to all of this, and that is the nature of people like Putin. I mean, this man is an extraordinarily tough-minded guy. He was in the KGB. He ran the KGB in his early 40s. You know what it takes to run the KGB at that age? This guy is extraordinary. He's got ambitions that may not take into account the kind of national power structures that you are referring to. He is going to be a real player, and a difficult player for us all around the world.
Do you think he wants a war with us?
No, of course not. But he's not looking.
So he's going to go into Poland.
But I think he perceives that he can get away with what he wants without.
I think he's going to try and do it without going to war.
His relationship with, what's her name, the head of Germany?
Angela Merkel.
Angela Merkel.
Quite intriguing from both points of view.
Well, he speaks fluent German, and
it's a very lucrative arrangement that they have
yes,
from both points of view.
They used to have that relationship
and she
under
is
the
very,
Tsar.
she is
They
very.
had the same relationship under the Tsar. The Germans and Russia had a long-time relation. They're working. They got tremendous economic interest. Germany produces this high-quality material. He's got the raw material. They got reasons to work together more important than who gets Luhansk.
Don't you think some of these world figures are more interesting than other world figures?
Well, take a look at Putin and Bibi Netanyahu. Both nationalists are the most popular figures in their country in the world.
I'm talking worldwide.
Yeah, but that's short-term popularity. I don't think that wears well over the long term.
I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with what?
No, I don't agree that it's short-term popularity. I think Putin is very popular in Russia. Very popular. He's a very strong leader. Okay, and he articulates in everything he wants to do. He's got great appeal to the Russian people.
Did you see the picture of his daughter?
Yeah, I did.
She was
who is she's in Amsterdam, and because of this flight and getting the remains and all of that horror, she's got quite a bit of publicity.
She's a very attractive young lady.
Yes, but that's in the national interest, Pat, don't you think?
Well, you say that with some surprise. You think her father is ugly?
No, but I think he has I think he's not as pretty as she is.
We'll see that he gets a copy of this show. You better watch where you go walking at midnight with that cat of yours.